Hey guys, I know I just posted a video this morning talking about the dice system, and I've already seen some discussion there, and I really appreciate that. And I hope that as we do this, nobody feels like disappointed when their ideas aren't used, because there are so many ideas going around, and obviously many of them are mutually exclusive, which means they couldn't both be used. And it's also like, as we work together more, we get to know more about the project, and the more the project has been developed, the more you understand how to make something that matches the project, right? And so I'm still at the early stage of trying to figure out exactly what everything is. So thanks for all the discussion. Anyways, I just had a nice long 1 hour meeting with Skari. If you don't know who Skari is, he's one of our content producers. He's brilliant. He's a really good tactician, and he's really good with rules. And so I was trying to run this by him, trying to show him why I didn't like what I had produced so far, the problems that I had with it, and what solutions we can come up with. And an hour later, I now have a scribbled notebook of some really good ideas. And I want to show you our initial idea for the core rules for Solar Requiem. And when I say the core rules, I mean like the core rules, like how do you roll the hit and how do you damage somebody? So I'm going to show you that right now. So there was a big discussion over D6s versus D10s. I really wanted this one to be D6s just because of the way they feel, and it's a lot easier to get them. I know it's not hard to get D10s, but everybody has lots of D6s. Everybody plays 40K, and so you already have tons of them. But I was talking to Skari about how, the issue I have, if I'm rolling to hit, forget the surge dice and the fumble and the complication dice for now. Let's just look at this. Let's say my skill is 5, so I get to roll 5 dice. Your defense is 3, let's say, and every 4 plus is a success. Forget about what 6s are. Let's say I got my 3 4 pluses, then I hit. Which doesn't seem like a problem. And if the game didn't have upgrades, meaning like a campaign system, that wouldn't be a problem. But what happens when I upgrade my guy and he gets another, let's say he's upgraded a couple times and he gets 2 more. If your defense is still 3, the chances of failing this, even though I might do it, see, it's really not hard. Now at this point, my chance of not hitting it was very, very slim. And that was even a bad roll and I still hit. Or conversely, if the other guy upgrades his defense, he might actually upgrade it high enough that now most starting grunts or whatever have no chance of hitting whatsoever. So there has to be a cap on the dice, but if there's a cap on the dice, there's a cap on upgrading. If there's a cap on upgrading, that's no fun. So instead I was like, well, maybe the skill is what you have to roll, but then we'd have to switch it out for D10s because there's not very many. Like you go from 5 to 4 to 3 to 2. There's not many upgrades before it's really powerful. And so Skari had the idea, and I'm going to get some things wrong about whether it was Skari's idea or my idea, because we went back and forth so many times, it all blended together. And he's like, well, why not have it as a comparison of stats, tells you how many dice you get. And what that means is kind of like if you're familiar with 40K, it'd be like strength versus toughness. Strength is not a number, is not what you need to roll until you compare it to toughness. And so let's say, for example, I have a range skill. We'll just keep it simple. I have a range skill of 5 and you have a defense of 3. So we start with 4 dice always. And then we ask the question, is my range skill greater than your defense? If the answer is yes, we add a die. But if it's not, and I say, well, is my range skill less than your defense? And if it is, then I lose a die. And if they're the same, then we stay at 4 dice. So you end up going between 3 and 5 dice. What this allows is somebody wants to keep upgrading our defense, it never stops people from having at least 3 dice. And what that does then is it makes it so that they're harder to hit, but there's a diminishing return on upgrading your defense. But if you're up against another really good warband who's really upgraded their range skills, then that extra defense is going to matter. It's kind of like if you picture the strength versus toughness system of 40K right now. If I have toughness of 1,000, it's not any better than toughness 30. Which is not really much better than toughness 20. It's not until you get below that you start to get to strength weapons that'll actually care about that toughness being that high. So it's kind of maxes out. It doesn't max out how high you want your skills and defenses to go, but it does have diminishing returns. And so I thought that was really interesting because it gives us a way to keep upgrading guys without things getting out of hand. You don't get that the rich get richer and the poor get poorer kind of thing. There's always a chance. So then the question became, well, then how many successes do we need in order to hit? Because before, the number of successes was the defense, but now the defense just determines how many dice I get. And that'll probably be like a core number. And this is where play testing is going to come in to figure out what that core number is. Like, for example, you need, it's always 4s will hit, and then maybe 6s explode. Then you roll another die. So there's always a chance of it kind of getting out of hand, which is fun. I think that's actually fun. And instead of your defense determining how many successes I need, there's just a core mechanic that says you need 2 successes to hit somebody, or maybe the core is 3. And then that number gets changed according to certain things like the range. So maybe we say, okay, we start with that you need 2 successes, not 2 dice, I'm just using that as a number of successes, but they're at long range, so it becomes 3 successes are needed, and they are in cover, so 4 successes are needed, which is interesting because now I'm still rolling my 4 dice, but now I need 4 successes. So hitting them is very unlikely. Oh, wait, I got a 6 there, which then exploded to another 6, which then I got 5 successes, which was a hit. So I was still able to do it because 1, the exploding 6s, and 2, if we kind of cap it at long range and cover, so really maybe you start with 2 and then long range and cover, add 1 to each of those, and we keep it in that realm, we have control over that. So as we write rules in the future, we know that we never have to worry about being like, but what if they need this many to hit? And it's like, no, you know that it all stays within a certain bounded area. So I thought that was really cool. So then the second thing is I'm going to call them surge dice and complication dice. So well, let's say that you're going to roll 4 dice. You would replace one of them with a surge die. This is the one that determines whether you get a critical hit. And then you replace another one with a complication die. And then we roll. And if the black one is a 6, it's a critical effect. Oh, we got a 6 there. And once we got that 6, we get to roll another die. Oh, it's another 6. You guys are seeing this explode. You're going to be like, the exploding's too good. It's like, no, it doesn't happen that often, trust me. And then if this one was a 1, it's a complication. So let's say this was our final roll right here. Let's say we needed 2 or 3. It's like, well, we got our 3. No problem. And we get to activate a critical effect. And that can be a lot of things. Like a weapon could have armor piercing as a critical effect. Or it could do extra damage as a critical effect. Or it can let you on fire. Or it can knock you back. Or, fill in the blank. And this one, I was going to make it something simple like your gun malfunctions. Or jams. Or your weapon breaks or something. But then Scary had a really good idea. It's like, no. What if you roll a 1 on your complication dice, actually activate something your opponent can do? For example, and we keep this list very short so that there's not analysis paralysis. One of them might be after you resolve whether or not there's a hit. So you have to resolve this. So if it's a hit, this doesn't negate it. We resolve the hit. And after the hit is done, they can, let's say we're shooting right now, they can either make a regular move, basically like ducking for cover or moving towards you or something, or they can snap fire back with like a pistol. So they get to fire back at you, or they can say you're gun jams. So they can actually say, you know what, I just want to. So it could just be those 3 things that you can move, you can snap fire or snap attack, as we'll talk about with close combat, or you can just say your weapon malfunctions if that is actually a thing. It's not close combat. And then you have to use like a minor action to try to unjam your gun next time. But it's after you've shot, so they don't get to like jam it before you do any damage. So I thought that was really cool. And then as you upgrade, you might gain access to more skills that activate when your opponent fumbles or when they get a complication. And you might even have a defensive skill that when you're shot at, they have to replace 2 of the dice with red dice. And so all of a sudden you have almost twice the chance of allowing it to let you do one of those complications. And then on the flip side, somebody who's particularly martial prowess, or if they're super lucky, they might be able to replace more than 1 of the dice. Heck, you may be like super upgraded later on. It becomes 3 of them, getting them more chances to roll the 6s. So it's more likely that they are going to get their critical effect, which I thought was really cool. And this goes for close combat as well. You would just do your melee skill versus their defense the same way. I was thinking it would be opposed rolls because that sounds fun, but I'm not going to, because this way the system stays exactly the same for shooting in close combat, so it's easier to learn. Also, it's an alternate activation system, but also the way we're going to do damage, what we came up with, really lends itself to not worrying about your opponent just getting to kill your guys before they do anything. So that goes to the next part. This video's getting long, but if you're still with me here, thank you very much for being awesome. So when we go to do damage, so damage would be, this one I'm still trying to figure out, but essentially it's going to be the strength of the weapon will determine the number of dice. And I'm thinking what it'll be is strength versus armor. So If I have my strength is higher than your armor, well, then I get 5 dice. If it's less than your armor, then I get 3 dice. And if it's the same as your armor, I get 4 dice. So that's what armor does. It changes how many dice I get. And then once you go to do the roll, every 4 plus does a damage. Now let's say I did on average, so I do 2 damage. And so the armor, so if you totally like roid out your guy and give him tons of armor, guys can still do damage to you. And maybe there will be like things that will reduce damage as well. And so maybe armor will both be a stat and also a damage reducer. But the damage reduction part of it would not be more than like a -1 or a -2. Because if you do any more than that, then you basically almost become immune to damage. And by the way, if you get 0 successes, you're still going to do 1 damage, as we will talk in a second. So if you're always going to do minimum 1 damage. And then the way that works is that we're going to have a stat called grit in addition to your hit points. So let's say your grit on the average person is going to be like a 3 or a 4. And so let's get a model. Let's grab this dude right here. So let's say he just got shot, and let's use small dice. And I did 2 damage to him. So we put a 2 next to him. So he's taken 2 damage. So we're going to call that stress, actually. He hasn't taken any damage yet. He's taken 2 stress. And then somebody else shoots him, and he takes another stress, and then blah, 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 blah. And his grit is 3. So at the end of the round, there would be a recovery phase. And in part of that would be actually looking at this number. And if it's equal to or higher than their grit, then they take damage equal to whatever this die is divided by their grit. So if their grit is 3, for example, and this was 3, they would take 1 damage. And if it's 6, they take 2. And if it's 9, they take 3. But then they reduce it to whatever it needs to be. So let's say it actually got up to 4, and they have grit of 3. Well, we would reduce this to 1, and they would take 1 damage. Most guys are only going to have 1 or 2 hit points, so that probably kills them. But what it does is it allows them to continue working, and damage is then done at the end of the round. So damage is done simultaneously. And we might even allow for like a little recovery roll that you roll a die for your grit. So you got 3 grit, so you roll 3 dice, and every 6 allows you to remove 1 stress. And so maybe you actually took enough stress. Like let's say this guy has 2 hit points and he has a grit of 3. Well, 6 is going to kill him. But you get to roll his grit of 3, and he rolls the 3 dice, and he rolls. Let's say you roll a 6, and we reduce that to 5. And so, well, that's 3 or more. So he's going to take 1 damage and reduce this to 2, and then he takes 1 damage. Use an orange die, so he's down to 1 hit point, and he still has 2 stress on him. And he's still alive, so he managed to survive that on top of that. And those things are optional. Like I'm not married to any of these ideas yet, exactly how it'll work, like whether you get to recover and then see if you die or what happens. But it's basically like, or when it goes to healing, like if a medic comes over to you, they don't get to heal hit points, they only get to heal stress. And so like basically during the round, you took like a ton of stress and you're going to die, but then a medic comes over and heals you for 3. It's like, okay, I'm not going to die anymore. But once it turns into damage, well, that is like an injury, and a medic can't treat an injury that fast. And so that's going to have to be taken care of after the game. Well, not if there's just one, only if you're taken out. But the idea is that a medic can only really deal with minor injuries. And what do we call it? Stress or minor injuries. So like maybe that white die is actually how many minor injuries you took, and it only affects you during the recovery phase. And that kind of represents more of a firefight in a melee fight, and lets it, like I said, have simultaneous damage. I think that's the main things from all of this. There was a few other ideas, but that's mainly what I want to talk about. Whew, that was quite the data dump. Hopefully you followed me along right there. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave it in the comments below, or if you're watching this on Discord, then, or either way, if you want to leave it on the Discord, then that way everybody can see your comments, then that would be best. So, toodaloo, happy wargaming.